and we talked together about sort of the problems facing veterans. So yeah, I do know Dr. Sisley. She's a great lady.
Did you participate in her veterans cannabis study?
I did not. I met her afterwards. I met at least two of the people that were in her study when I was out in Arizona, but I personally did not get a chance to do it.
Yeah, because I mean, she's done some incredible work around this. And, in addition to just improving the lives of everyone, there's also been a little bit of a battle of the stigma of cannabis. When you decided to go that route, how was the VA where you are on the East Coast? I mean, were they receptive or did they give you any pushback?
So my VA is here in Washington D.C. and I would say much like the is symptomatic of this industry as a whole, this problem set of cannabis and where it's scheduled as a whole. Um, it's really neither much support nor much against it, right? I mean, I'm very honest about what I use to treat myself, and I want them to know. So I don't mind letting them know that I used cannabis to get better. I used it to wean off all these things. I'm sure that it's no secret. I never felt any pushback, but I think and I hope we get into this as we talk later. There's no pushback, as I was saying, but there's really no support as well. There's no mechanism for me to go in there at any point, even now, and say, hey, this was really effective for me. These are the pills I was on. This is what I came off. What do you think of that? Because it's a Schedule 1 substance, there just isn't any depth to their knowledge, to the literature, to anything that's been FDA approved, which Dr. Sisley will tell you is the real problem. We can't even have conversations about it because the researchers can't get their hands on enough good product to actually do the studies we need done.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that will change sometime in the near future. I know that there's a major bill that has been passed through committee and it's likely to get a floor vote in Congress that will basically deschedule cannabis. And then I think that you'll see the gates open a lot for this form of treatment for veterans. But with the VA, a lot has actually changed because 3 years ago, when I first started talking to veterans about this issue on this show, a lot of them had the same complaint that they couldn't even be honest about it. And if they tested positive for cannabis in their system, then they were flagged as a drug addict or flagged as someone who needed drug treatment. So then they would just avoid going to the VA altogether for other treatment that they might need. And it became like this huge problem, and there was a greater stigma attached to it than there is today. But I'm glad to hear that it's changed and that they're not giving you the pushback that you might have gotten several years ago. And how long ago did you start on a cannabis program?
So, I mean, for me, like I said, I live in DC, so it's legalized here in DC. And so when I was at the height of trying to retire and as I was telling you earlier, sort of on that mix of of pills, that was mid 2017. So I've been about 2 years having sort of weaned myself and then worked myself into the regimen I'm on now.
Right. So actually your timing was a lot better than some people that I've spoken with. And I know from just family experience, I'm a military brat. I've talked about this a lot, 3 generations, but I grew up with a Navy pilot and my grandfather was a colonel in the Army Air Force. He was a West Point graduate. So I've seen firsthand the family impact of war. My father on the Vietnam War and my grandfather, obviously, World War II. And the impact that that had on them and the family. And cannabis was never even an option. So you can only imagine during the World War II era, the end of that, you didn't have the same toxic cocktails of drugs to deal with these things, but there was alcohol. And you see how the memories of war can really take a toll on people. And I think that most people in civilian life really have a hard time grappling with the extent to which some of these can really impact not just the veteran, but the family as well. And so I'm getting to a question here, and that is, once you started weaning off of the medicines that were prescribed to deal with the injuries and the psychological impact of war and introducing cannabis, how did that affect your family?
Yeah, for me personally, it's really hard to explain, sort of, but I think we all who describe this scenario kind of get to the same conclusion, and that's when you're on that mix of very potent pills we were talking about, it's really hard to sort of control your feelings about things. It's almost like you're separated from yourself, right? By design, those pills are kind of designed to separate you from yourself so you can deal with the pain or the anxiety or whatever else. And what I came to realize was that cannabis allowed me to sort of deal with the problems in a more relaxed manner. It gave me a lot more compassion, and it helped me really be less dead to the world, would be the best description of it. And so when we're talking, here like we are about the effects of cannabis and why it helps, I mean, I think you see people from across all kinds of different ranges talking about what this product does for them, right? We're talking cancer patients. We know that it helps all kinds of others with appetite. We're seeing the veteran uses. So much like you were pointing out, it certainly seems like something that we need to take seriously as an antidote for PTSD or for this anxiety or for this regimen of pills that we know is harmful. Because I think there's a long line of people, right? I mean, we have a huge opioid crisis. Law enforcement and first responders see tremendously difficult things every day. It's, I personally, having come out of the veterans community, obviously am fighting tooth and nail because we get our health care from the Veterans Administration. So as long as it's Schedule 1 and they can't talk about it, we're stuck in a loop as federal employees who went and served their country. And I think it's past time for us to take this plant seriously and really do the research that needs to be done and help people in ways, to your point, that so they don't have to turn to the bottle or not have any alternatives. I mean, it's not a panacea, but we're pretty sure, based upon the feedback, that there is not an insignificant amount of people who this is really going to help.
And is already helping, and I've covered this as well. The rate of veteran suicide is still unacceptable. It's such a tragic outcome. And a lot of it has to do, I believe, with the cocktail of medicines that are being prescribed. And all you have to do is watch any primetime show and you'll see 2-minute long commercials about side effects of a specific drug. And almost, most of them, from my observation, list at the very end, suicidal thoughts or actions. And it just makes you wonder why we're not awake to that problem, because suicide is such a preventable finality. It's such a tragic outcome for families who have lost people to suicide. With your organization, Veterans Cannabis Project, tell me a little bit about the mission.
Sure. So it is the Veterans Cannabis Project. It is an organization, primarily we've been operating up in DC. And what we're trying to get after is full legal access to cannabis through the VA, just like any other medicine. As we were talking about, with the conditions we have, the folks I know could go back and go back to the other medicines that are on offer that many of us has tried and it hasn't worked. What we'd like to see ultimately is the VA, having done its job with the federal government, figured out what this is good for, what it's not good for, and present this to veterans as something that is an option to everything else that we have out there. So that's the overriding goal, is full legal access for veterans. The big things that we feel need to happen as sort of mission statements for the organization are: we need to ensure access, as I talked about at the beginning, and access is, help with paperwork, education by doctors and those who know about what's going on, specific recommendations for for treatment options, depending on the symptoms you suffer from. So it's access, protection, as you know, and certainly as somebody who's been looking into this, veterans are worried about protections, right? They're worried about Second Amendment rights. They're worried about benefits, whether that's home loans, whether that's jobs. This is we need to protect these people who have come back, done their job, and are asking for another tool to make them better that they're seeing helps a ton of people around them. So access, protection, and then the last one is research. And I think this is fairly obvious to anybody who wades into this subject. Is this plant, it has all kinds of amazing compounds. It has a litany of things that we know it's effective in activating within the body, and things it's helping folks like me with and dealing through health problems. So we need people studying this specifically for the types of things that veterans are being handed them, because we're seeing veterans self-select for it anyway. We're seeing veterans really want to use this option. And so we feel if we can get the access, protection, and research, then we can get something that looks like full legal access that's helping vets get better.
And are you dealing with anyone in Congress? I know, for example, Congressman Ruben Gallego from Arizona, actually, he's a big proponent of veterans' rights when it comes to cannabis. And I know that there are a number of other congressmen who are advocating for veterans' access to this. Are you doing any lobbying as well?
Yes, I think that's been the focus and really the strong suit, if you will, of the Veterans Cannabis Project. Is we have groups of people out there across America that we're calling the VCP Force. These are people who are in districts where we either want the representative or senator to support some legislation, or we want to educate people on, what we think needs to be done in this space. And so, to your point, we spend a lot of our time bringing veterans in from around the country to talk to people from their district, right? To talk to anybody who's sort of advancing bills. And to your point, there are quite a few legislative solutions, whether it's a Safe Banking Act to kind of get cash off the streets and clean it up, whether it's a States Act, which is one that would have equalized the discrepancy between federal and state. So if it was already state legal, federal would leave that alone and you would move out under those auspices. So there's been a number of ways to legalize this, and whatever it is that comes across the docket, the Veterans Cannabis Project wants to be there to make sure that the veterans' needs are seen through. So we appreciate everybody's support. We've talked to quite a number of folks over the last year, and that's really the sweet spot, because it is such a federal paradox right now, and it is such a federal issue, especially with the mission statement of getting us full legal access through the VA. Those two have to come together, and we need to find a way to make that law.
Yeah. Right now, Congress is very friendly toward these cannabis bills, but the Senate is still dragging their feet. Are you speaking with any senators? Is there anybody who's specifically lobbying just the Senate or talking with Mitch McConnell about this?
Again, we have talks with as many folks as we can. We've talked to Senator Sullivan. We've talked to Senator McSally. We've talked to a litany of folks that we think are going to be important and can really understand the veterans' health issues going forward. So part of what I feel like our charter at the VCP is to share these personal stories with the people you're asking about, and really anybody else who's interested in understanding this. As much as advocacy, as you're pointing out, needs to happen with the specific people who need to move these bills, there's a big education piece that we find we're always working uphill on. Those people that are sort of in the industry and understand veterans cannabis issues is a pretty small group of people who can talk about sort of where that is outside of the big hubs right now. And I think that's the value of the VCP is connecting those legislators directly to people in their district who can give them a personal story about how it's changed their life.
Absolutely. You mentioned Senator McSally. Is she receptive to your organization? Has she been receptive to pro-cannabis legislation?
Right. So I don't want to speak for her. I know that, as